the
new logo in the back. Yeah.
Great.
For those listening on podcasts, you go check us out on YouTube, and probably Instagram might have that picture. We got a new backdrop for the launch of our podcast, Beyond I Do. It's me. This is the sub-genre of Beyond the Letter, Beyond I Do, much more niche about marriage and relationships. Yep. This is hosted by me and my wife.
The missus.
And so, yes, so we have a new backdrop that's behind her called Beyond I Do. It looks really cool.
It does.
You know,
I like the blue.
that's where I enjoy things. I enjoy creating logos and
you do a really
marketing
good job
and
at
stuff.
All the time.
Man, thanks, babe. Yeah, I like doing merch, and I just helped a pastor with very big platform and stuff come up with some names for his own podcast and stuff. So I'll let everybody know when it comes out and what it's going to be called. But I helped him with the branding of it, stuff like that. So very excited to do that stuff. So this is ours, Beyond I Do.
Beyond I Do.
And at different times, we may have, single people on, couples. I'm very interested for us to have conversations with couples that experience much more niche stuff, whether blended families, divorce. But Beyond I Do is a little different than Beyond the Letter, because Beyond the Letter is more about a loose conversation. Mm-hmm. We don't want to give definite advice or answers, because we want people to carry the conversation at home. But then Beyond I Do is much more, we want to get more practical. Yeah. Much more helping advice.
It still will lead to conversations and maybe good ones.
Yeah, definitely. But I think more so, like, we hope what Beyond I Do is, like, it helps people.
Yes.
It brings the ball down the court to have a healthy relationship. Yes. Where Beyond the Letter, we kind of want to break down stereotypes, even make you feel uncomfortable. And we may not even that episode help anyone in any regard other than open a conversation. Yeah. Where Beyond I Do want people to walk away and be like, okay, so there is light at the tunnel with this relationship, or maybe I should break off this relationship, or whatever it may be, or in a marriage couple, just be able to have those conversations. So I thought for the launch, it'd be good, because we want to make these episodes shorter than Beyond the Letter, so that people can sit down kind of in one setting. Beyond the Letter, sometimes it takes people 2 weeks to listen to an episode, and it's meant to be that way. Beyond I Do, we hope that it's a little more bite-sized, 30, 45 minutes or so of people can sit down, husband, wife, or a person, get some information. So that being said, and Ashlee doesn't, I don't even know the agenda, but I had an idea. I had a thought.
Yeah, you didn't tell me.
What I think. So for our first loose episode of Beyond I Do, was a Beyond the Letter, Beyond I Do episode. We had Nathan and Sanaz. We all had a conversation. That was kind of the launch. Which, who would have thought the first episode we would have had some clips go viral. Right. That happened to be yours. So.
Some would say good, some would say bad.
Which immediately, here's the funny thing. Immediately when it started going viral, because what happened was, it started going viral on our page, but then these motivation pages and other men started grabbing it, clipping it. So, there's this motivation page on TikTok where right now it's almost at 3 million views. And TikTok works different than Instagram. Instagram wants you to debate and argue and all that stuff. TikTok actually wants to feed you based off your interests. So kind of wants everything to be agreeable. Right. Which TikTok or Instagram, you have a lot of mad women at your take. And then TikTok, you have nothing but appreciative men, because it feeds the interest level, right? Very few people in TikTok that are like, I don't like this take, blah, blah. They love it. That's why they're sharing it. Instagram, it's every which way. So I think, right now on our Instagram, yours is almost at 1 million. That other TikTok that grabbed it's at almost 3 million. So it moved fast. One of the first piece of advice I told Ashlee, well, I've yet to go viral, but everyone else on our team has gone viral. So here's what I've noticed.
I think I would say in a protective husband way too.
Yes. So when this and I like not being the one that goes viral, because it lets me be the behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz, and pull everything out of everyone to get the little clips. But the first piece of advice I told Ashlee was turn off your comments. Mm-hmm. Not in terms of turn them off where no one could comment, but turn off your notifications for your comments. Right. So that you're not driving and all of a sudden you see someone say this girl's an idiot or whatever, and then you get in your head and all that stuff. So I said, turn off your notifications on your comments. Yep. And the second piece of advice I said is, and don't respond to everyone. Right. Don't feel like you have to apologize. Yeah. to anyone or clarify. This is what I meant. Blah blah blah. Kind of said what's going to happen is people in the comments are going to start their own conversations, and it's going to flow. And then our Beyond the Letter team, Nancy and Alize, do a great job on their own already to engage in the comments on behalf of the podcast without any of us feeling like we emotionally have to. Because then you start second guessing yourself. Then the next time you're on the podcast, you start thinking to yourself, well, now I have to start to over clarify, and then it loses the natural.
But that's where you came in too, because you were good. Because I had two of my friends that ended up sending me the clip, the motivational one from TikTok, and I was like, hey babe, like, this has gone viral. You're like, yeah, no, duh, I saw it. And I was like, no, on TikTok. Don't we have a TikTok? And then you looked on it and you're like, that's not even our TikTok.
That's not ours. Like, that's somebody else's.
And he's like, no, that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Ashley was like, uh-oh, should I be worried? I'm like, no, that's great. That's means people either relate to it or don't like it. It's one or the other. But it's great because it exposes people to a new form of thinking, right? Yeah. What I found resounding was the people who disagreed with your statement were single women, so something on that that we could talk about. So here's what I want to do for those that this may be new and you don't follow on all our social platforms, you just listen to our podcasts and all that kind of stuff like that, is I'm going to have Gabe play this viral TikTok or I don't know, we're on Instagram or TikTok, whatever it is. I'm going to have Gabe, or who's cutting today? Corey. Okay. Hey. I'm going to have Corey cut to it to give us an idea, and then we'll carry on because I do have a thought for Ashley.
I love my husband, and to say that I obey him is to say I honor him, to say I respect him in his choices and his decision to lead this family. I don't lead nothing. If I were to lead this family, we'd be down in the gutter because I got Afterpay, Affirm, I got debt, I got all this craziness in my life. I ain't leading nothing. That's what God created him for me. He is my helpmate, and I'm to be his helpmate, not his burden, not his back talk, not the one that brings him down. And so sometimes I think that we are in such this independent mindset as women, and it's like, I'm sorry, I love my husband.
So, and obviously the way we cut these things is so it creates a little bit of controversy. And if you go listen to the podcast, it probably isn't worded exactly the way that it ends up getting cut. And that's kind of on purpose so that people get a feel of what's being said rather than verbatim. So it is always important for people, like, go try to listen to the whole thing if you want. But relatively true, the thing is, what you said, and in the sense of you using that as an example, like me being in control of the finances. In this case, you're using it as an example of why male leadership is important in the home. Right. You weren't giving like a use case, like men should control the finances in the home.
Right.
Like
no.
Sometimes the
wives do.
And we were talking about that. Like you grew up, my mom controlled all the finances or dealt with paid all the bills, all stuff. My mom did all that stuff, What
there's no problem with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I don't think what a lot of people put together is like your statement in that is an example of why male leadership is important, how that has applied into your own life.
Absolutely. On
why it's important, because controlling finances isn't a strength of yours. No. And so you're saying regardless, like my husband and that quote unquote obey is in regards, this is expressed in this way, but it's expressed in a lot of ways. Right.
Right. Absolutely. I think it even goes into, I think there was a statement, correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle Obama had even said too, and we've discussed this plenty of times, even on the last podcast with Sanaz and Nathan, that it just depends on the season that we're in. Sometimes it's 60-40, sometimes it's 50-50, sometimes depending on what we're doing. But like we've always said, as long as we're in unity and we're in agreement with what is going on in our family, and like we like to say, a little circus is in line, I think that there's no problem with having those conversations and open, honest conversations about that, because finances isn't my strength. I love to shop. Yeah. So if there isn't order and a reeled back in, I could be a detriment to the family, rolling in debt and having these things that could affect my family. But there has to become a leadership to say, hey, we got to be mindful of our spending in the season. This is what it looks like. This is what the finances look like. And that was just a plain example. But that's the same thing when it comes to the kids. I would say that I handled the majority of the kids when it comes to the day-to-day, because you work. And I have no problem with that because we're in unity with that. Yeah. And I would say that you would agree the same. Like, Yeah. I mean, sometimes I don't know what Matthias and Thomas would look like if you dressed them. Every day, if I let you do that.
There'd be some days that they would look good. Some days I'd be like, whatever. Just pick out whatever you want. Yeah.
I had you get them dressed the other day, and I walked in the car, and I said, "Oh, we're not doing their hair today." So is what it is. But it's little things like that. It's knowing and understanding your circus, your family, what that looks like, and then just be an example. But I will say that I do look to you a lot when it comes to leadership and the things that I do, because I believe that you're diligent in your word and your time with God, and just how you have designed yourself in a character and morals and ethics as my husband, and what you desired in a marriage. And so I think that's where a lot of people get lost in relationships or even in marriage, where they're like, well, my husband isn't being the leader. Well, you dated your husband for a minute, correct? You were engaged with your husband for a minute. So there had to be a sign where you saw that there was maybe either not, I wouldn't say a lack of leadership, but you saw in the character like, oh, I may be leading this ship. A woman knows right off the bat if you can get over on a man. Like if you're going to be running this, if you're going to have the time frame, if you know that this is how it's going to be, like end all be all sort of thing, that I'm going to lead it, you know what route you're going down.
Yeah.
And you know that early. I knew that early in our relationship with you.
So that gives a point. You know, since it went viral, you started getting DM'd from a bunch of women because they're seeing it from everywhere. And pull out your phone. Don't give up who it is. But there was specifically a person who gave you a long message, and someone from Ohio or something like that who's engaged. And I want you to read her comment. And and that's what we'll talk about today. Have a conversation about this, because number one, I thought it was great. That's number one, the win of this podcast and us, what we do on social media, because it really helps us reach people far corners. And that's our goal, is really to help people, not just beyond I do, but beyond the letter. And so I thought this was a great example. Someone who has no idea that you're connected to a church, has no idea your husband's a pastor, has no idea, like doesn't know anything about you, but heard your statement, trusted you enough to say, well, I'm going to seek this woman's Instagram out and I'm going to DM her for advice. Yeah. And then she asks you this, a young girl.
She said, my fiance was not brought up a leader. He doesn't know much about life and has always been taken care of. In our relationship, I have to take control of everything plan, and it's exhausting. He stands around like a lost puppy. He truly just try. I don't think his mind is getting it. He wants to be a leader in our relationship, but doesn't know where to start or what to do. I can't trust him at all when it comes to taking care of us. We have gotten in many arguments because I don't want to be the leader anymore. I have been my whole life. We are at a loss. I can't give up control because we won't be taken care of. I've tried to have him make sense of things, and he gets it afterwards. But if it's not the same exact scenario, he's lost. And then she said, how do I give up control? How do I trust him even though he's proved to me he can't do it over and over?
Jeez. Yeah. So that's,
I haven't responded. And I feel awful.
Well, it's long. It's a long response. Not the message long, but the explanation is a lot.
And you know me, explain everything to me. And I would be like, I want to know more. Tell me more. Like, what are the scenarios? Because I can't just give a broad answer to something like that if there's deeper conversation. What is he not leading in that you need him to lead in? Yeah.
Well, it's stuff we've talked about before. Some of the early onset questions I would want to know is, what's his relationship with his father? Right. Yeah. What's his history with his father? Does he have a father figure in his life? What's his religion look like? And it looked like we went and looked at some of their pictures and stuff. So it looks like they're Christian. And so it's my next questions would be, what does your church life look like? Right. Does your church have a men's ministry? Right. Does your church have male elders? Anything like that in that way. So there would be a lot of qualifiers that I would begin to ask. The number one advice that I would give to this girl who's engaged, right? We're not talking about a married couple, which this podcast is the start of something. So we're going to get into the weeds all the time, helping men out in that way. And so one of the ways we're doing that is through e-courses. So we have our Beyond I Do e-course coming out, and then in the future we're going to have a men's one specifically just for men. So regardless today, the first thing I'd say to her, because she said, how do I give up control? Number one, I'd say, don't give up control. You're just engaged to this guy. Like you've not said I do. Yeah. So don't start submitting, obeying, saying, oh, I'm going to peel back and let him see if he leads in that sense of, if you're engaged, this is the time you have to start making really tough calls, because we sit with the couples that are 15 years in, 30 years in, 40. I mean, and you believe it or not, like we're young, but given our advice, leadership, time spent with God, man, we sit with couples that have been married 30, 40, 50 years and counsel and sit. And many of them often say 20 years into marriage, 25 years into marriage, this is who he was when I was married, and it's not gotten better. Right. And it's like, well, what made you think it was going to get better?
Right.
What did he exhibit in the dating phase that made you thought? It's like this idea, well, yeah, I married a player, but I just thought when we get married and have kids, he would settle down. And you're like, well, you probably shouldn't have married the player.
Right,
you know?
right.
Yeah, he had other girlfriends while we were dating, but I just thought that, he just, if I locked him down, it would change.
Right.
And it's like, well, he didn't, their old saying, tiger doesn't change his stripes.
Right.
Now it can, if your relationship with the Lord, transformation with God, you can change if you're humble enough and if you submit to God and decide to do the tough stuff, whether you're male or female. Right. But outside of that, things aren't probably going to change. Yeah. So in her case, I don't think the onus is on her. The tough part on her is having to make a decision whether I want to follow through and marry this individual.
Absolutely.
And probably see we're going to have a lot of issues unless she says he desires to do this. He just doesn't know. I've always thought that's kind of a cop-out. Any guy or girl who just says, well, I don't know, I wasn't raised around it, or it's hard for me to do. I mean, I kind of think that's a cop-out.
I agree.
So, there's great books by Tony Evans and all these other individuals about kingdom man and manhood and leading your family and all these things like that, and then you go on, you talk about the pastoral leaders on YouTube, sermons on manhood. It's like, it's out there. Right. There's a guy named, and I did a sermon on before. There's a guy named Ivy Marsh, and I think it's Ivy Marsh. And he writes a book where he talks about the man is the priest, prophet, king, and whatever the series you and I did. Yeah. But he just talks about that just for men. And I ended up preaching a series on that because I was really inspired by his concept of men being all of those things. And then you and I did the women are also a prophetess, a queen, and all that. But his book is solely on manhood. So there are resources out there that if he exhausted his efforts, maybe he did, but if he hasn't, what books have you read? What videos have you watched? What men have you gone to in your church? What men's gatherings have you gone in your church? What older man, gray hair, or someone you respect have you taken to coffee? Right. Who do you have? And if he's like, I've not done any of those things, then I would look at her. I would say, you have to make a tough decision whether you're going to move forward with a person who may not change.
Right.
And
you're going to be talking about it 10 years down the line.
Yeah. And I always feel bad because I know what's more than likely going to happen is that she's going to move forward with marrying.
Oh, because it's
sounds easier.
Good. Yeah, and it sounds good until you hit the struggles of you just doing everything like you're doing now. And if you're doing it now, like you said, it's going to continue.
Yeah.
It really
and it feels because it seems easier now, but let them add kids to the equation, and now she's mother because she's not from this, because this girl's they're a young couple, probably 23, 24. Yeah. Like, add children, now you put on a mom hat because you don't even have that hat on yet. So right now, it's like, I'm leading my fiance and I'm making all the decisions and all this stuff. And I'm kind of tired of it, but, I love him. Love is the big L word, and that's great. But it's like, I love him, but you're nothing else right now. You're just fiance, and then you'll be wife. So you can live. It's easy to live in that moment until you have to live as mother. Right. Now, if you're being mom and then you already have one child being your husband, like, now the marriage is going to get tested really, really hard.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that we always talk about, even in our dating phase that we had, was like a non-negotiable. And this is sounding like a non-negotiable for her, but she's not allowing it to be the top of non-negotiable to say, you know what, let's pause this engagement. Obviously she didn't say how long the engagement was, but pause the engagement and really dialogue in on what we're going to be doing and how this thing called life is going to play itself out in our marriage and in our life, and what roles are we going to take. And if she's saying that I'm continually saying that and he's not getting it and I have to self-explain it every time, you're going to get exhausted and you're going to get frustrated. And then obviously that's what people don't understand, I think, too. Marriage is something that is such a unity in front of Christ, but it's also such a division for the enemy. He hates marriage. So even if you get married, your marriage is covered by God, but it doesn't mean it's safe from the enemy of getting in, like interceding within it and trying to bring up the faults and the flaws within it. Because I mean, like you and I, we had that early on in our marriage. We got married, we were blissful, didn't realize I had past trauma. Didn't realize the enemy was trying to cause division. Didn't realize the thoughts that were going to come about. So I think that a lot of people have to be very mindful and diligent and strong in their foundation with Christ when it comes to marriage, and know the person that they're marrying. Yeah. Truly know him. Luckily for us and gracefully for us, ours was just a little speed bump that we knew that we can get over. Yeah. But things like this could play a big part and detriment within your marriage as far as leadership, because it is biblical that a man is to lead the house. Yeah. And to love his wife like God loves the church. I think that people take that lightly because it still is a standard. I know we talked about this the other day with the couple. You're like, what did you tell him? You said you have a responsibility not only to the situation, but to Christ as a man to live out this word. And if you aren't living it out, you said something to that degree of basically like, if you aren't living it out, it's on you. Right. And so even as a husband, like,
you're gonna reap whatever is the fruit of what you do on your own. And that's what it is. So, guys who go, well, which is always like one of the first questions I will ask couples is do you want a healthy marriage? And because that matters. Right. If they say, well, no, and sometimes we hear, no, I just want to be right. I mean, you think that's not reality, but couples say that. They say, oh, I just want you to tell her she's crazy. I just want you to tell him he needs to start leading. And then you sit there and you go, well, the person who called this meeting may be the guilty one in this situation, or you're both guilty, and you both need to do some stretching. And I think that was the difference with me and you early on, was like, we wanted a healthy marriage, and we were willing to do the stuff that's uncomfortable, which is not be selfish in the marriage. And so that's part of what it takes. So if you needed something from me or I needed something for you, as hard as that may seem, we would find accountability, relationships, mentorships, resources that would help us be better at what it is that we need to be. And so, there's elements where my dad didn't spend a whole lot of time with me in my childhood. And I was just with my grandpa and my dad making a joke, and we passed by like this little, fishing thing, which is over at Lido Creek. And my grandpa goes, oh, one day you should take your son fishing there. And I said, Grandpa, my son has already experienced more memories with me as his dad than I have of both of you and Dad combined. And they started laughing. And then my grandpa was like, yeah, that's true. And then my dad was like, yeah, that's kind of true. And they have their own reasons for it. Right. And then beyond the letter, you can go find those reasons with our Father's Day stuff and everything like that. But in that, I didn't have an excuse to say, well, my dad never showed me, or my dad never did that particular thing. So therefore, I'm not going to my wife and going, babe, I don't know how to spend time with the boys, because both of my grandpa and my dad had their own companies and worked really hard, and they weren't around to do that. And then you go, oh, okay, well, I guess Adam's going to be, an absentee dad that is just going to do what he saw and go build a business, No, I didn't let that excuse, which is a true excuse. I could easily say, well, I don't know how to balance work and family because it was never really shown to me, you know? Right. But it's not. So partly in her comment to say, well, he doesn't know and he wants to do better. I mean, I had this old saying with one of my friends, but if you knew better, you do better. Mm-hmm. In other words, don't say you know better, because if you know better, you do better. So if you knew better, you do better. And if you're not doing better, then you don't know better, and you're lying, or you're lazy. It's one of the two. So to say, well, I know I ought to do this. If you're not doing it, then either A, you truly don't know how to do it, but you're not doing the work then to figure out, well, what do I got to do? Like first thing I would say, if you came to me and said, Adam, you're not leading. Yeah. Or I feel like I'm doing everything. I feel like I have a young child, which I think that's the word she said. I had a baby or something like that. You guys remember that? It was something like something that would hit me in the gut if you said it about me. But if it's true, it's true. Like, it should be said if it's true.
Lost puppy.
Like, if you told me I was a lost puppy, I'd be like, dang. And it could be true. So immediately I'd want to be like, well, how am I lost? But because you just follow me around and you do what I want to do and you never have an opinion. Everything's always yes, dear. And he may say, oh, because I grew up, that's what you're supposed to do. Right. You just, I just follow the boss. Those jokes men say about their wife. Like, she got to go talk to the boss, got to go, it's like, oh, be quiet. And I get it. There's a humorous nature to it. And there's but if someone really means it, you're like, oh gosh. So in her statement and like that, one of the first questions I would ask if I were him is, what is it that you're looking for me to do that I'm not doing? Because she may have an unrealistic expectation. We don't know that.
Exactly.
So there may be something missing where she's like, well, because my dad did X, Y, and Z. Okay, hold on. Okay, so now you're comparing your fiance to your dad. And, I've seen that before in married couples. Well, I remember we did a couple and she, we live in California, so it's very common that most households are going to have dual incomes. Right. Well, we had a girl who said, I expect that he support me financially and that I get to stay at home. They didn't have kids at the moment. Right. So it's like not that they had kids, or it's just, I believe he has to cover 100% of the finances. And then I'm basically his trophy wife, because that's how my mom was with my dad. Yep. And then when I have kids, I'm solely going to stay home, and it's his job to make up all of the finances. And he's looking at her, his eyes as huge as a bug, saying like, I don't know how we're going to do that in California. Right. We may move. She's like, we're not moving away from my family. So there were all these rules of like, this is how it is with my family. This is how it was with my family. And this is how you ought to do it. Yeah. That was a red flag.
Right. Absolutely.
So first thing we'd have to find out from her is, what expectations do you have? If it's how you were raised, then we have to figure that out and see what's cultural and what's blah, blah, blah. But if it's legitimately the dude is just doe-eyed and just does want to follow you around everywhere, what are you looking for? And then he needs to be to step into those things.
Absolutely.
It's really not, it's not as hard as people make it. It's hard, but it's not as hard as people make it to seem.
Well, yeah, and I agree with that, because sometimes I know we've gotten a lot of questions just on like, okay, now I'm in the marriage and my husband isn't leading. And I'm like, okay, in what aspect is he not leading? Like, break that down to me so I understand where he's not leading that you need him to lead. Because I also think it comes to, like I said in the TikTok, it's an honor and respect that I have for you, that before I even may make a decision or a choice that could be a big decision or could even be small, I love asking you. I ask you about everything. And that's just because that's just naturally me. I want my husband to enjoy the things that maybe I enjoy, even though you may not like it. I'd be like, hey, what color do you like my nails? Hey, the other day, how do you like my hair the most? And it wasn't to say because it's a vain thing, but like, hey, the other day, you were gone out of town and you were like, hey, can you go over to Living Spaces and can you go get that couch? I panicked. Yeah. You picked out the couch. You were like, let's do
the link and everything.
The link and everything. And then I told the guy, I said, my husband's not here and I can't make this choice. It wasn't to say that I couldn't make the choice. I just, as a wife, didn't want to make the bad choice, even though he picked out everything. I'm like, literally laid it for me. And I was just like, oh my goodness. This is but it's a financial choice. Yeah. It's a big choice. Even though you told me to, I said, but what if he sees something else he likes? I don't want to be the one to blame. But I knew he wouldn't because he picked everything out.
But I think it's that TikTok, either you send it or I send it. It's the idea of like a girl shared on TikTok. She's like when you have a good man, you freely give up your right to be independent, and you create a dependency on your husband that when you didn't have him, you move furniture, you'd make calls, you rent an apartment, you'd buy a car, and then you get a husband who has good leadership, who you trust with your life and with your decisions, and so then immediately you inebriate, and you're like, I don't know how to buy a car, I don't know how to fill up gas, I don't know how to, it's like, and all that stuff like that, because there's this idea of a healthy dependency to say, my husband is leading, therefore there's some things I'm just going to take out of my mind and say that I'm gonna, that I could do that. When normally, if you were single, you'd figure it out on your own.
Absolutely.
Or you'd call your dad and
Absolutely.
ask your dad to do it.
Absolutely. And I've been around a lot of single women now in the church, and they do desire that. I have a girlfriend, Nikki, and people know Nikki. She's like, I need somebody to come take care of me. I'm tired of this single life, the independent life. She's like, I can do it. I'm good on my own. I can make do with what I have. I know how to do the finances in the car, but I want a man to fill that space because I'm not supposed to be there.
Yeah, right.
And so I think that's where a lot of people get so confused. And when they're talking about, when I ended it, when I said, I'm sorry, that independent mentality, it wasn't to say like, that's something I don't want, but I know a lot of women desire to be in a relationship with a man that loves them and nurtures them and cares for them and uplifts them and just wants to see the best out of their spouse as well. And a lot of women, they want to be taken care of. Like, I'm taken care of more than just financially, spiritually, physically. And so I think that's where we get so torn with that independent mindset. It's nothing wrong with it, but I think once it's like, I don't need a man, that's where we have to, I would draw the line. Yeah. So even back to the woman and her comment, I would want to know his side too. I'm so in I'm in that, like, I want to respond.
We have like very minimal time, but when you sent me that, I'm like, oh, I'd love to Zoom them, but we just have so much minimal time, and it's like we might end up doing it, but it's like, because I would like love to talk to him and also encourage him, because I don't know his story with his dad, or we go like, hey, here's some resources and stuff we're going to talk about in the future. Like, here's some books, you should read them, and she should measure him off of those things. Right. She should say, hey, right away, I would tell him, right away, you need to find a mentor, male mentor, and you need to meet with him once a month. Mm-hmm. If you miss a month, then I'm going to start evaluating whether this marriage is right. Like, and if I was married and I was a woman, I'd encourage him and say, because he's, regardless of him leading well or not, God has called him to be the leader. Absolutely. So you if you're married to him, you have to approach it a little differently. If you're engaged, you can more so be like, hey, here's my line in the sand. I need you to start doing these things, or I don't want to move forward with the marriage. If you're married to him already, if you married a bump on a log, you're stuck with a bump of log. Otherwise, you can start to encourage him. Right. And what I encourage women all the time, if you are married and you don't have that, start encouraging with your body. Yeah. Start using, because that, for most men, that's what wake them up, is like, start using physical affection and tenderness and go sleep with him, and then go ask him, hey, you think tomorrow you could take care of this for me? Yeah. And start to see if he responds with you using your feminine qualities to arouse him, to wake him up, to get him excited, and then kind of put some things out there plainly and start to encourage him. So, you just, if again, we think that the church is kind of the hope for a healthy family. So if you're not religious, start going to church and see men's gatherings, and tell your husband, hey, I'm going to get a babysitter. Let's go away for a weekend. At the end of that weekend, tell him, hey, I signed you up for that men's thing at that church, and you think you'd go check it out? Or, hey, that man that you always see at work, he seems to have like a really great relationship with his family, really admirable. You should take him to lunch one time, and start encouraging him to, find good mentors, healthy mentors, buy him a book on it, and just have a really honest, real conversation about what your desires. So if you're married, and in the future podcast, we'll go deeper into those things and bring on other people to have those conversations. But those are, some of the things that I would encourage right off the bat to kind of start to begin to go on a healthier track. Absolutely. With a couple. I'll say this, and then another element was, a guy recently commented on your post, and he said, if your husband does all that for you, then what value do you have? He doesn't need you. And that's just, once again, he's probably single, because that only single people kind of make those claims, and if he's not, God forbid, But it's the same thing, but the opposite in feminine qualities. If I provide leadership and comfort and a level of dependency and trust, then for you create you make my house a home. Right. You make my home something. When I was a bachelor, my house was cold. It was kind of chaotic. it was a bachelor pad.
Yeah.
And so you moving in my home, you made it warm. You made it exciting to come home. You made it joyful in the home.
Yeah.
You brought children into the home, which brings fulfillment for me that I'm a father, and you nurture my children and you nurture us at the same time, and you take care of us, and in the same way, leadership doesn't mean making all the decisions. So with us, you look after our vacations, you make sure we rest well, you tell us all, let's go outside and play soccer, you motivate all of us, you help us to see the great things that are in our life and in our family, and you motivate the boys spiritually. You know, you really, we're both the spiritual leaders, but I spiritually lead more in a confidence, in a trust in God, in a rooted. You lead them more in the let's do prayer time and all that. A lot of people conceptually think like, oh, the man leads all prayer time. I don't, not necessarily. You're helping lead with that. We drive to school, you lead the kids in the prayers, and then, you know, we take turns praying and all that kind of stuff like that. And so there's elements that, like, you brought in a lot of stuff to that. You also work, so you bring a portion of income into our home. I don't do all of it. You're not a stay-at-home mom. And so there's many blessings. That guy, well, what does he need her for? I need her as much as she needs me. And the value she brings is the value I bring, but they're not the same things.
Right.
And so
Absolutely.
you need to find what those things are and then celebrate those and emphasize those. And there's natural male and female qualities that I think should be there. But there are great couples out there where the man stays at home and watches the kids, and the woman goes and works, and that works for their family.
Absolutely.
That doesn't make him any less than to say, well, he's not leading his home. He could easily lead his home in that situation. He could easily still create a level of boundary and character and bring in leadership with the family and with what she needs, and listen to her and love her and all that kind of stuff like that, while also being that responsible provider in many other ways that may not come financially. And so it's just funny when people see stuff on social media, they just take one idea and then they run with it left field. And it's like, no one said that, you know. And a lot of people were going to your defense like, well, my husband's bad at money, and no one. They were like, she's not saying that every household should be where he takes care of the money. But at the end of the day, I think I was talking to your mom about it. I said, at the end of the day, I kind of disagree with that, because I believe every man should understand their finances.
Oh, absolutely.
So to say, well, some men are just bad at their finances and the wife should handle it. No. If the wife handles it, it's just because you've decided that the wife handles it.
Right.
If she's handling it because you're bad at money, then as a man, then I do kind of have an issue with that. Because as a man, you should have a level of understanding of finance.
Absolutely.
And you should have an understanding, because you weren't married your whole life. There should be a season when you were single that you were building up a life for your family, and you were pursuing a goal in an education or a job and building a home, an apartment, a house, or whatever that is. So it's like, in any regard, I'm much more apparable to say that a young woman stayed at her parents' house forever until she met a man and then she went there. I wouldn't be more accepting of a man that did that same thing, but it stood on his butt and didn't get a job and build a life. I'm not talking about 20-year-old. I'm talking about 30-year-old, 35-year-old, to say like, no, that man needs to get out there. Like, my boys are going to get out there and get after it.
Absolutely.
As soon as they're old enough to do that. 18, 19, 20, 21, like you're going to get up and get after it. Absolutely. Because we're not going to build a laziness in you. But for what the wife would bring in the equation is very much differently, right? So there is a side, because me and your mom were talking about on Sunday when we were talking about your post. I'm like, because she's like, oh, I did the finances. I'm like, that's true. It worked in your marriage. But there shouldn't be a man that's bad at his finances. That's not a good character issue. And your joke about having a firm and all that, that's not like in the sense that collections is coming and repoing your car. You were making a joke.
That was literally a
saying
joke.
Like, yeah, within my reason, I affirm. But if my husband left me my own devices, I don't know what's going on in our household, so I'd just keep running the card. That's the point, that you were making.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think when it comes down to that, the last statement you had made about even the gentleman in his comment, I just don't think a lot of people in that independent mindset, I wouldn't say that the independent, I think a lot of people don't know what they're actually looking for in a relationship. They don't know what it means to have a successful and healthy relationship and what that looks like. Because he's like, well, what does she bring to the table? Well, what would you want a spouse to bring to the table at the end of the day? Because if you're making the statement to say, well, if he does everything, then what is she there for? Well, are you a eunuch and you don't want to be with anybody? Like, you know what I mean?
But generally people get married because they don't want to be alone. They want to have kids or they want to have a lot of sex.
Right.
It's like, and they figure, oh, let's move in. They either move in or get married. And it's like, but you realize when you get married, you kind of tend to have less sex.
Yep.
You do get the kids, but you realize that that's a lot of work.
The sex.
And then you can still be alone and be married.
Don't worry, our kids have never walked in on us.
Right. And so you could be married and you could still be alone.
Right.
So some people are going to marriage or long-lasting relationship thinking that it just solves a few things,
right,
rather than realizing how big of a decision it is that takes a lot of ability to be able to not be selfish.
Right.
Like they don't think that's
that part
of the equation.
That part.
Like I think I could be so, and as a man, when I lead, it means she has to fulfill all my expectations. Like, well, that's selfish.
Selfish.
Yeah, that's
Very.
Not. That's why she rolls her eyes when you walk in the room. Like,
absolutely, and that's and that's where going back now to the young girl is where she's leading, but has this always been a mentality of you? Like, is this what you want? Like, you've shown it on the front end, because I think we've talked about that too. Is like there's a lot of young men that want to be mothered in a relationship, and did you show him that on the front end? Because I don't know how long have you guys been dating. But now you're engaged. So now are you engaged? Are things starting to open up for you to realize, like, hey, maybe it's not the one?
Yeah.
Or I'm selfish in the way that I want things to get done. So this is how I expect them to get done. This is the way they need to get done. This is how they need to get done. And he's not doing it my way.
Yeah.
Because that's very selfish.
Yeah.
Because if I were to tell you, like, hey, you can go to work, then you need to come home, you need to eat your dinner, then you need to bathe the boys, and you need to go to bed. Like, what? You know what I mean? But you're going to lead somewhere in that, and you can tell me what I'm doing.
But many guys would be like, I'll
do that.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
You know, I'll do whatever you want, you know.
until 10 years down the line, they're like, this drill sergeant sucks.
Yeah. Well, and I remember we worked with a couple one time, and they were an older couple that had recently got married, and this is years ago. But one of her statements was, "I don't like when he goes out with his friends." And we're talking, are they not good friends? Or oh yeah, they're fine. And okay, does he go out with them all the time? Oh, maybe once every 2 months or something like that. We're trying to put the math together on like, what are you not happy with? And finally she says, because I don't have any friends, and it's not fair that he has friends and he gets to go out with his friends. And for literally like almost a year, he had obeyed her by not going out with his friends. Yeah. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, bro, you should go out with your friends. Like, you should, like, you should go with your friends. Yeah. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And so.
Why is it his fault he has friends, but you don't?
Yeah. And so in that same case, but that particular couple was also like, I want him to lead. I want him to date me. I want him to, come up and say, I got a reservation, and I want him to come home and lead this family. And it's like, but you won't even let him tell you he's going to go hang out with his friends. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want that kind of traditional system, everyone's going to have to give and take. Absolutely. Everyone's going to that's why we always talk about unity. It's like you got to be unified in what that entails and what that looks like, but you can't expect one thing if you're not willing to meet in that middle. Absolutely. In that regard, and you make those adjustments as well in what you need to do. It's like, well, I'll start doing that when I can trust him. No, you can't have your cake and eat it too. No. You can't make this a test. You can't, oh, you do that, then I'll let up. No, you have to start at square one again and both move in a really healthy direction. Absolutely. And almost redate each other. Absolutely. And I know of couples who have separated, and they separated for 2-3 years, and then they come back together, and then they kind of start redating each other. Yeah. And then they're really healthier than ever, because they realized, man, in order for this marriage to have a restart, we literally have to restart. Yeah. Like, we got to treat each other like we're in high school again, boyfriend, girlfriend. Yeah. I need to start giving you carnation grams and all that kind of stuff like that. Sometimes you got to do that to start back at 0-1, because you can't always bring up, well, last year, 2 years ago, it's like, okay, well, I'm trying. Right. I'm trying, but are you going to keep bringing up last year? Right. So there has to be a healthy balance that says, hey, we're going to start over. And you got to discuss and say, this is what this looks like. This is what I need from you, and this is what you need from me. And then you have to move in that direction. When we first got married, we had a lot of those conversations, more so of like light expectations. Like, hey, I really don't appreciate this, or I don't like this. And we had to be a person that either said, okay, yeah, I'll stop doing that. Or to say, well, too bad. That's the way I am, and that's the way my family's been.
Absolutely.
Like, oh, okay, well.
And not to say that, because I know we always talk about, like, we don't ever want to come across like, obviously we have it all together, but when we talk about like just what the healthy relationship look like, we did a lot of the dating on the front end to where our Mondays were non-negotiables. Our Mondays, just because they were just our off days. So the off days prior to kids were our non-negotiables, where we got to hang out all the time. Yeah. So we got to hang out to where the point, to where you were like, hey, my Mondays, I'm going to go with the guys. And I'm like, great. Like, it gets to the point where you do it so well that you're like, okay, now we can change our date nights to where now it doesn't need to be a day. Now we can just say, hey, on the calendar, I put in on a Friday at the end of the month, we need a date night. And it just becomes a repetition, just because we are so just familiar with each other, and we know when we need that alone time, or if we know we're good and we don't need it, and we could just be with the family and be with the kids. But I wouldn't take it as a wife if you were like, hey, I need a guys' night, because sometimes I look at it as a wife that when you're saying you need a guys' night and you're saying it's with a specific person, not to say that I think highly of my husband and he doesn't have a lot that really bothers him, but most of the time I think it's for the other person. And so as a wife, how selfish of me to take away someone from that person if they want to hang out with my husband. If they want to hang out with my husband and they need that guy quality time like this young man probably does, in a mentorship way, family way, or a brotherly way, why as a wife would I want to be that burden or that hurdle in the way of somebody else's blessing or receiving or knowledge or wisdom that they can get from my husband? So whenever sometimes you ask me, even for a guy's night, I'm like, yeah, go have fun. Yeah. Go sew into them. Yeah. Go get a guy's night. Go hang out.
And I think we got at a place where, which my dream for every couple is like, we know what each other's like kind of needs are. And so we do a shared calendar. So you could put something in the calendar and I go, oh, she's hanging out with some girlfriends that night. I'm assuming I'm watching the boys,
right,
Right. Or vice versa. I'll put in something, and only a handful of times have you texted and said, hey, that's not going to work, or I'd really like you at home. And then I text back and say, hey, we're going to have to cancel that. Ashlee really wants me at home for this. I've been blah, blah, blah. But 90% of the time, we just kind of look at the calendar and go, oh, okay, Ashlee has a thing. Adam's doing something. We'll make it work for each other. Or, I'll text back and say, hey, I noticed you're hanging out with a friend. I'm going to be working late. Can you find a sitter? It's
Absolutely.
And you commit. And that's my goal for like every couple, is it gets to a place where it's really easy to live life.
Yeah.
You're not walking on eggshells.
No.
You're not scared of what they're going to say. There's not, this animosity when you get home. There's not tick for tack, which is big in marriages. This tick for tack. You did this, so I'll do this. Blah, 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 blah. So it's kind of our hope, and through the podcast, like really helping people get to a place where marriage is fun. It's exciting.
Yeah.
There is a level of system to it that you can really have a balance in your life, that you can still enjoy friendships. You can still work really hard. You could still raise your family and it be really healthy at the same time. And so I'll say this, because the point of the podcast is to be shorter than the other ones.
Perfect.
Is I'll say this, encourage any other guy, because I've said it before with young men, like the point is, no leader ever has to say that they're a leader. That's bad leadership. If I have to tell someone I'm the leader, then you have led bad. That's not the point of leadership. And the point of leadership is that you're not always the front man. And so I think when some women hear, oh, obey my husband, or he's the leader, it's this idea that he's the front man for everything, and he has to make all decisions, and he has to do this and that. And that's actually not practical leadership. That's not in real life what leadership is. In real life, what leadership is the leader is the constant source that keeps everything moving ahead of schedule. Yeah. In the same way, great restaurants have what's called a brigade. And so there's a chef and a sous chef, and there's a hierarchy. And so each person is in control of something, but the chef is kind of overarching and just making sure before the meal gets put out that it's something someone would want to eat. And as a Christian husband, that's kind of your goal, is like, before we go out in the world, we want to make sure that we're presentable on all fronts. We want to make sure our kids are taken care of, the family's good. And that may mean that my wife is handling a lot of that stuff, or that may mean that she's taking some lead on some things. And that may mean, so that is the point of what leadership is good leadership doesn't scream, because some men go, yeah, that's right, I'm going to go put my foot down. I'm going to tell my wife I'm the head of this house. I've seen Ashley. I'm going to send her the video of Ashley and say, see, that's why you obey me. Like, you and I have been together for 10 years. Yeah. Never once have I ever said you have to listen. Nothing has ever come at you have to listen to me. I've never said that. I've never said you need to obey me.
Never.
I've never said I'm the head of this house. Never said that. I've never said God has called me to lead. I've never said that. Never used God as a cop-out. I've never said you need to do what I say because I'm the leader, blah, blah, blah. I've never used the concept of male headship as an authority to get you to do something. I've used my character and my integrity, and even in times where we weren't on the same page, we've even sometimes just let things go. And then when something didn't go good or whatever, we revisit, how did we get ourselves here?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't get ourselves here because maybe you didn't respect my views or I didn't respect your concerns. I mean, there's been times I moved forward on relationships that you had concerns with, and then it bit me in my butt, and then you kind of were like, I told you so, but you did it in a loving way. And so that is like, that wasn't you taking the lead and telling me I couldn't have friendships. That was you as a wife sharing me your concerns, and I didn't listen to them. And then I got egg on my face. And so that as a leader, I take note. My wife is really good at blank. Like you start to get smarter, So that's what good leadership is. Yeah. Leadership takes criticism. Absolutely. Leadership learns. Leadership. So you'll never find, what's funny is some of these guys who are amening your TikTok, you're like, yeah, that's why my wife doesn't listen to me. It's like, no, your wife doesn't listen to you because you're not worthy of being listened to. She needs to listen to you regardless. That's God's command. That's God. But if you're wondering why she won't, it's because you're not worthy of being followed. Right. You're not worthy of doing the leading. And so work on yourself, become the man that your wife wants to see in you. Right. And maybe she is a pure anarchist. Okay, maybe you're in that case. But for all intents and purposes, I believe a man that begins to lead with grace and lead God's standard, that women go, wow, that's what I really want. And they'll start to follow that,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So for future stuff, everybody welcome. Thanks for joining the podcast. We're here every week. I don't know, Corey, when are we posted? Like every Thursday or Friday? What did we decide? Every Thursday. So this is out every Thursday. So we basically, for right now, Beyond the Letter, you can start it on a Sunday, Monday, give you your whole week almost. And then Beyond I Do will take you into the weekend. Yep. And then, you guys will probably in the future have some ways you can submit questions and other stuff like that, because those are fun. Yeah. And do some more stuff like the girl DM'd you about. And
I'll respond to her.
Yeah, it's tough, because in that case you want to give someone advice that they probably don't want to hear. They don't need to hear it, which is, hey, if you have concerns, maybe you shouldn't move forward. But no, most couples disregard that. I'll say with this, because this was funny. Recently, I sat with a couple, because with most couples you sit in premarital, they say, hey, I want you to take us through the gambit, see if we make it, and blah, 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 blah. And we were at a wedding, and we were at the table. It wasn't with the people that got married, but we were talking, and someone asked us, have you ever told a couple that they shouldn't get married? And we said, yeah, actually once or twice we've told a couple. And then someone at the table said, if someone told me that I shouldn't get married to my husband, I would be mad and crushed, and I'd be upset that they said that. And I'm like, but what if it was true? Right. Like what if you needed to not be married right now? And so that's that idea of that double entendre, where sometimes we want advice, but we want advice for the outcome that we desire, not the outcome that's probably headed down. And that's where it's tough, because you want to give advice which basically says, if nothing changes, you're going to have a tough marriage. But then they would say, well, that's not life-giving. That's not hope-filling. And it's like, well, we've done this long enough that's the case. If he doesn't start changing, or if your expectations don't change, given maybe you have an unrealistic expectation, then you're going to have a very frustrating marriage.
Yeah. I think it also goes down to the whole equally yoked. I think a lot of people, we talked about it multiple times. Everyone just thinks because we're both a Christian, we are equally yoked. That does not mean that whatsoever.
Yeah.
There's moral ethics, non-negotiables, your foundation, how you follow Christ, your leadership. Those all play into the equally yoked, and how you follow into leadership and how you follow into submission. So I think that when they say, oh, well, we're both Christian, we both serve, we both do this, that's very surface. Let's get to the root of things and really dive into, are you truly equal?
Yeah, right.
And can do this thing called marriage.
Yeah. There's habits and then there's disciplines. A habit could be, we go to church, we pray together. A discipline is a drive that says, I have a discipline to take care of my finances. It's much more the difficult things.
Right.
It's the thing that takes a little bit more thought and learning towards.
Yeah.
Whereas a habit's like, oh yeah, we wake up every morning and we kiss each other before we go to work. Great habit.
Right.
That's not really a discipline.
Right.
Like it's a good habit. Yeah, before I go to work, I tell my wife, I love you. We hug each other. We give a kiss. That's a fantastic habit. Mm-hmm. But what does the disciplines look like? Disciplines look like, okay, well, I'm learning this about God. This is what I'm reading in my Bible. This is what I'm writing down. This is where I'm controlling my finances. We're cutting our budget by doing this. Where me and my wife are forcing each other to do blank more because we're not good at it. That starts to build disciplines.
Right.
So for this girl in her relationship, what I would encourage that young man to do is, tell me what your disciplines look like. And if he goes, well, I kind of wake up around 10 and I got this job. And so I go to work and then I come home and I maybe mosey and I do that. I'd be like, bro, let's start creating some disciplines in your life that are stringent, because in marriage, you're going to have to live much more disciplined. A discipline for a man is, hey, you're married, don't talk to that girl. Like, that's a real discipline. That's not a habit. Or I make a habit of not talking to women. No, you need to make a discipline of not talking to other women.
Absolutely.
So it can bleed a little big, but it's very different. Yeah. Having a habit of not flirting with women and having a discipline to not flirt with women is two different things.
Absolutely.
So that's where you'd start telling a young man, like, let's grow some disciplines in your life. What you're reading, what you're listening to, how you're activating those things, what you're doing with your fiance. Let's build those things. Finding a good male mentor is in there and other things like that. So, great episode, everybody. First episode, Beyond I Do. Blessings.
Bye.